Guys, my producer kicked me out of the studio, but I put myself back in because I want to welcome you personally. Welcome to Muskie's Canada at Work, a virtual odyssey. Muskie's Canada official. Mike Hauser, take it away, sir.
Hey, Ryan. Awesome. Thank you very much for that introduction. That was amazing. Thank you. Just want to thank all the Odyssey team there before we even get started. You guys are doing an amazing job. Very impressive. So my name is Mike Hauser. I'm chairman for the Muskies Canada Mississauga chapter and owner of King Bowser's Sport Fishing. Thank you everybody for coming. Today we have with us, we have Brent Bochuk, who is, sorry guys, loaners here. Okay. We have Brent Bochuk, who is from Setting the Hook TV and a guide on the Kawarthas for Muskies. Brent, say hello.
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? How are you, Mike?
I'm good, man. I apologize for messing up your introduction there. I really
do.
Good. We also have Dr. Sean Landsman. He's from Carleton University. He's a PhD and author of Project Noble Beast. Hi, Sean. How's it going?
Hey, everyone.
Great to have you with us today. We have a very exciting show for everybody. We're going to be talking about muskie handling and release techniques and the release tools and everything you need to get that job done so you can get that fish back in the water unharmed as best as possible and to be caught another day as a monster trophy fish. So it's something that we need to sustain our fisheries, and every muskie angler needs to be aware of these things to save our fishery, to protect the fish, and not only that, your kids get to catch bigger fish. So I'm not going to hold everything up here. I'm just going to give a quick, brief introduction to the Mississauga chapter. So we do awesome monthly virtual meetings where we've had some top name presenters such as Frank Thurston, Landry Smith from Rover Baits, Matt O'Brien. We've had Gord Pizer this year. We have some great names lined up for the rest of the year. Our outing is September 17th and 18th at Totem Point Lodge up on the French River. Great place. So check out our website and you'll be able to get all that information. You can sign up and do all that stuff. Our web producer is Ryan Fagundo. He's in the background here actually taking care of all this Odyssey stuff. So he's a superstar. So, all right, I'm not going to talk about us anymore. We're going to get right into this. Thank you guys very much. I'm very excited. So we have Brent Bochuk and Dr. Sean Landsman. So let's get to it, guys. It's going to be exciting.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mike.
Pierre, you can go ahead and share my screen if you want. There we go. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Mike. I'm going to talk a little bit, just give some introductory slides here, and then I'll let Brent take over, and then I'll come back in at the back end of this. But, you know, as Mike said there, catch and release is really critical within muskie fisheries. And a big reason for that is because this fishery is almost completely dominated by catch and release. In other words, there is the potential, if we don't do it right, to do a lot of harm to the fisheries. So within a fishery, there's generally a natural mortality element and an angler-induced element of mortality. Often that angler-induced element in other fisheries would be through harvest, fish just getting pulled out of the population like walleyes and taken home and tossed in the frying pan. But, you know, muskie anglers don't do that. You guys don't need me to tell you that. You know, there's something like over 97% of muskie anglers, like specialized muskie anglers, actually release their fish. And so the question then becomes, all right, so we're making all these assumptions in terms of how we manage these fisheries based on whether these fish are actually successfully being released. And what if a lot of them die? And so, you know, considering that many water bodies have only one fish per 5 acres, many water bodies, in fact, a lot of naturally sustaining populations only have 0.2 fish per acre. That is, you know, a pretty substantial amount of mortality that could be occurring, that could really be affecting a population. So successful releases are really critical to muskie fisheries and underscores the importance of why we need to do this right. So generally speaking, in the angling event, you know, there's several stages, there's about 4 stages: fighting and actually landing the fish, unhooking the fish, and then removing it from the net. And, you know, I would call that like an admiration period. You do whatever you want there. You can just ogle at the fish or take video and pictures and get a bump board measurement, whatever. And then there's the actual release element of the angling event. And so today we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to let Brent take over here, and then I'm going to come back in with some of the science behind all this.
Great. Thank you, Sean. So yeah, when we're muskie fishing, obviously we want to release our fish. We want to treat them as respectful as we can and make sure that we have a healthy, safe release. But that all starts when we first start fishing for them. It's very important to have the proper equipment. We want to have the proper rods and reels. So in order to have a successful release, we have to land the fish safely to start with. So what we're looking at a heavy action rod, anywhere from 80 to 100-pound test line. No, you don't need a 100-pound test line to land a muskie, but it's very important to have that heavier line to ensure that you can get the fish to the boat a lot quicker. That's going to allow the fish to get to the boat quicker. You're going to be able to net it a lot quicker. Years ago, the preferred method to land a muskie through Muskies Canada was actually using a gaff. And I know years ago, I actually wrote an article on proper gaff techniques. I would never recommend doing that now. It was explained to me once at one of the sportsman shows. I was talking to another guy, and I was landing him by hand at the time. He was using a net. That fish is fighting hard. It's just like maybe the equivalent of you trying to run around the block and then jump in your swimming pool and hold your breath as long as you can after running around the block. So you're working this fish hard. He's fighting hard, trying to shake those hooks free. You get him to the boat. The last thing you want to do is pull him out of the water right away. So we can use a cradle. We can land them by hand. But really, landing them by a net, you can actually leave the fish in the water a lot longer. The fish can kind of recuperate. You can get your composure. If you have people in the boat, like myself being a guide and Mike, yourself being a guide as well, sometimes this is a person's first fish. So it gives them a chance to get their composure as well. While you have that fish in the water, the fish is able to breathe. He's able to kind of chill out a little bit in there. Kind of using that like a big live well.
We call it the high five period.
The high
right?
five, yeah. Exactly. Gives people a chance to get their cameras ready and everything else. And so if you go to the next slide there.
Yeah, hang on. There we go.
Okay. So like I was saying, so once you get the fish in the net, you have a few different options. I always leave the net in the water. As you can see here, the net's in the water. Is using it like a big live well. So you can use it like a big live well. The fish can still swim around in there a little bit. If you net the fish and lift up on it and go to bring it in your boat, or when you put pressure on that fish in the net, that's when the fish is going to start freaking out. He's going to start thrashing around. Hooks are going to get caught up. When hooks get caught in the net, the better chance there is of the hooks getting caught in the side of the fish, maybe the eyes of the fish. So netting the fish, keeping it in the water without putting pressure on the fish, there's a better chance that fish is just going to kind of relax in the net, and he's in his own element still. Another important thing is when you're netting the fish, obviously you want to net the head or the fish head first, and try to get the head of the fish into the middle of the net. That way you're going to avoid some of those hooks catching on the side of the net. And the deeper you get the fish into the net, the less chance of hooking. Yes, your hooks are going to get caught up a little bit in the net, but if you get in the center of the net, there's going to be less hooks caught and a lot less damage to the fish, of course. Base case scenario, you can reach in with a pair of needle nose pliers and pop the hook out. Well, we're using heavy rods. We're using heavy line. We have sharp hooks. And when people set the hook in my boat, I tell them to set it as hard as they can, like they're trying to break the rod. I'm not worried about them breaking the rod, but you want to get those hooks in good. So the best case scenario is the pair of needle nose pliers. That doesn't usually work out so well. Usually, if the hooks are embedded and they can't get it out really easy with a pair of needle nose, then I'll just grab the hook or the hook cutters. Pair of Nickback hook cutters is the best cutters I've seen out there. And you get in there, cut the hooks really quick, and you can put the fish back in the water in your net while you decide. If it's myself taking a picture, sometimes I'll fish by myself. If I'm taking a picture of the fish, I'll leave the net in the water. I have my net in a rod holder, so it's not going anywhere. And if it's one I want to take a picture of, I'll get my selfie stick and have it actually Velcroed into the boat, put my phone in there, put it on video. I can take that fish out. If you take a little bit of breath and hold it, 5-6 seconds, you can move around with that fish. Just about like that long. Put the fish back in the water. Later on, you can go through that video and you snapshot your pictures. You can screenshot your pictures. And some of the best pictures I've got are off a screenshot that you're not actually trying to pose with the fish. You hold it up, move it around. Just 4 or 5 seconds is a long time when you're just moving around like that, and you can get that fish right back into the water right away. If I have clients in the boat, I already know if they want to hold it by the left hand under the gill plate or the right hand. And as we see here, you're supporting the fish the whole time when you bring it out of the water. If you're a guide, already know how they want it. If you're just getting a photo for yourself, one hand firmly gripped underneath the gill plate, the other one slid under the belly. And as you bring it out of the water, make sure you get that hand under there right away. So you're supporting it the whole time you bring it out. And at all times, keep it supported. I'm not a big believer in using the BOGO grip for anything on a fish. I'd rather hold them by the gill plate and under the belly. The last thing you want to do is hold it by the gill plate straight up and down on a vertical hold, or by a BOGO grip like that grip there. Maybe they have their place somewhere in the release scenario. I'm not sure where. But when you do hold it like that, and I'm sure Sean can get in this a little deeper on the scientific part, well, my believing is it's going to stretch out can hurt the vertebrae in the back and stretch out the stomach lining. It's hard on the neck of the fish. And it's just, I really believe it's really harder to release a fish healthy when you're going to hold it vertical like that. So a nice horizontal, keep it supported the whole time, and get your picture really quick. Get it back in the water as soon as you can. And if you go to the next slide, something I've learned, something I really picked up on through Dr. Sean's stuff with John Anderson on Monday nights is I used to put him in the water and I'd hold the tail. I would never pull it back and forth. Years ago, I remember seeing on TV, guys would hold a fish, pull it back and forth to try to get oxygen going through it. You're pulling water backwards through the gill plates that way, and it can be very damaging to a fish. And what I would do sometimes, I just kind of move the tail back and forth so the fish was going into an S shape. But watching the Monday nights there, put the fish in the water, and as I'm sure, Sean, you're going to get into this a little bit more as well. If the fish is upright, let it go and stay with it. If it's not staying upright, maybe you can hold on to the tail a little bit just so that it stays upright, keeps its balance until it kind of gets its where it's all about with it. Once I release a fish, I like to stay with it. Sometimes fish will go down. I think that's the best scenario. Stay in the area, make sure the fish doesn't surface again. I think we've all released a fish before where it's gone down, and maybe a minute or two later, it's kind of came back up to the surface. The last thing you want is for a fish not to survive. You don't want another boat hitting it, a jet ski or water skier going by the area hitting it. So I'll stay in the area. If the fish stays on the surface, I'll stay in the area and just get on your electric motor. Make sure, cut the fish off or cut other boats off so they can't come and run over that fish. I know we've all seen pictures on the internet where it looks like a muskie's been hit by another boat. And that's probably a fish that was released that never went down right away. I've also in the past used my live well as a release tool. A fish that would not stay upright. It was one scenario. It was very windy out, about 3-foot waves. We put the fish in the live well. We went into a sheltered area. I actually got in the water with the fish, held it upright till it would swim away. One thing you do have to be careful with that, though, is it has to be a legal sized fish, because once it's in your live well in your boat like that, it is now in your possession. And as the rules state, depending where you're fishing, there's a size limit. Even though you're doing the best thing you can for the fish, you just got to be aware of that. In this case, or in this scenario, we took it behind an island where it was calm. I jumped in the water with the fish, held it in the water upright for a couple minutes, and then it started to swim away, staying upright. It didn't dive down right away, so I got back in the boat on the electric motor, and actually would kind of come up beside the fish and would turn. So we kind of angled it off into a shallow, weedy area where I knew it would be safe, or it could, gain its composure, wouldn't get hit by another boat or anything like that. So, it takes a long time to grow a trophy muskie. Hooks are only a couple dollars. Cut those hooks. Do everything you can to make sure that you have a safe live release. And best of luck to everybody on the water.
Oh, thank you, Brent. That was awesome.
Yeah, I love that story. I've never actually gotten in the well, I shouldn't say that. I have gotten in the water with a muskie before to photograph it on release, but I've never like held one while I'm like in the water with it at eye level. But yeah, maybe someday. Yeah, I'm gonna just go back for a second here and talk.
Yes.
I didn't have any remarks prepared about boga grips and other lip grip devices. One thing there's a few things that come to mind here. So first of all, when you go to take a fish out of the net, it is very likely that there will be a period where that fish is going to be held vertically until you can get it up and into that horizontal position, right? To me, I don't see a huge problem with that. I mean, there is sometimes the risk that the fish will shake. You just have to do your best to hang on to it. It's just maybe that prolonged period of vertically holding the fish. That's probably not going to be great for it. So the longer it's being held like this, the more time gravity has to work on pulling down like the organs inside the body and maybe stretching or maybe damaging some of the connective tissue inside the body itself. The other thing with the boga grips, if you're going to use them, I wouldn't use them like in the photo there. If you're going to use them, I don't really have a big issue if you use it to grab the head, and then when you hold the fish out of the water, you're holding it like this. So you've got your other hand here, and it's supporting the other half of the fish. And so the lip grip device basically acts like your hand inside the gill plate, just inside the gill plate there. But
can I jump in there, Sean, for a second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I cut you off. But with the boga, I apologize. But with the boga grips, a lot of charter guys use it just like you were saying to kind of lift the fish, and as long as you got that hand underneath. But they actually do have another very good use, and that's when your fish is in the net, in the water, and it's deeply hooked. You can use them on the lip just to hold the fish down and kind of get that lure out as a stabilizing device. You're not using the weight of the fish on the boga grips, so you don't have that deep pinch into the lips, but it can be used as a stabilizing device to keep that fish still while you're doing your surgery. So it's just another thing. They do have their place and their time, and the cheap ones that don't spin all the way around is very bad. So you want to get an actual proper boga grip that spins. So if the fish does decide to do somersaults, it's not going to hurt the fish or yourself or anything like that. I personally don't use a boga grip. I have a pair of those plastic Rapala ones that are $20. They just have a string on the end that you kind of hold, so if it spins, it spins. But that's just what I use because I prefer those. But they do have their place in the musky release techniques. It's just they have to be used properly.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about using them with inexperienced anglers too. One of the maybe worst things that might happen is you have a fish and it thrashes, and you just drop it into the boat, and maybe there's carpet in the boat. That would be not great for the fish to be rolling around and flopping around and rubbing its protective slime coat off. Or you drop it and it damages some structure within the body. So in the event that you've got a really inexperienced person, it might be good to use that lip grip device and then attach it to their wrist in a way that might help them hold on to the fish. So so anyway, I think there's like Mike said, maybe a time and place for using them, but just do it wisely. All right, so I'm going to move forward here. We're going to talk a little bit about the science of catch and release angling for muskies. This is work from Project Noble Beast that was published back in 2011. Basically, kind of what I'd like to remind everyone is that muskies are really resilient. I've worked with a number of fish species, and some of them you look at them kind of funny, and but muskies aren't really like that. They can really take quite a bit of handling in order to really get them stressed out. So, for example, keep in mind that like for Project Noble Beast, as part of the quote unquote normal handling procedure, we use 90 seconds of air exposure. Now, this was based on a survey that we did with a number of anglers within the muskie community, spanning, maybe different experience levels. And we kind of took the middle road there. We sort of split the difference in terms of how much air exposure we'd use. But, this mimics things like measuring them on a bump board, taking video, taking pictures. And despite 90 seconds, like if I stopped talking and we all sat here in silence, 90 seconds. That's a fairly long time. And yet, despite that, we didn't find any mortality and relatively speaking, pretty minimal physiological stress associated with the angling process and holding them out of the water. A lot of anglers will talk about, oh, we really need to, lactic acid is a huge concern. I don't think it's a particularly big concern. Our data didn't really suggest that holding the fish out of the water for any period of time induced, greater changes in lactic acid or lactate. In this case, buildup. Lactate is related to lactic acid. The way to reduce that is to get the fish in quickly. And it goes back to Brent's point of, making sure, you've got the proper equipment. Do you need a 100-pound test super braid? No, not necessarily. But, are you going to go out and target muskies with 8-pound test line? No, please don't do that. There are things that you can do to ensure that you reduce stress whenever possible. And that's all we're trying to do. That is the name of the game in catch and release angling, is to try and reduce stress as much as possible and reduce handling time. So a couple other kind of key things that came out of the Project Noble Beast there in the catch and release study. We found limited evidence of significant increases in stress levels associated with like taking fish out of the water. Where we did find this tended to be at higher water temperatures, and again, sometimes for the air exposed fish. So this is a graph here looking at potassium levels in muskies. And the reason some of you are probably thinking potassium, what are these fish eating a bunch of bananas? What does that have to do with anything? But potassium, when it builds up, can actually stop the heart. And so sometimes you may notice, some of you may have caught fish that seemed just fine, and then nothing was particularly weird about the angling process. You got the fish in really quickly, water temperatures were like 65, whatever. And the fish just died, wasn't hooked deeply. In a case like that, it's likely that fish had a heart attack. And high levels of potassium can eventually lead to cardiac arrest. And so, this is evidence that as we get a little higher in water temperatures, we do maybe have to be a little more careful. Doesn't necessarily mean that we really always have to stop fishing when the water temperatures reach a certain point, but it does mean that we might need to adjust how we handle these fish. So what can anglers do to help the fish? It's just the basic thing is minimize air exposure as much as possible. If you take the fish out of the water for a picture, by all means, go ahead and do that. But keep in mind that you don't want to keep the fish out of water for too long. And then the other thing is minimizing overall handling. So I'm going to kind of piggyback off of what Brent just said there and at the end of his spiel there with the release, talking about releasing fish. I'm going to give you a kind of a scenario here. So we're bear with me. It'll make sense in a minute, hopefully. I did this late last night when I came up with this. So, at midnight, strange thoughts come into my head. But all right, so picture this. So you're at the grocery store and you're minding your own business. And some stranger comes up from behind you and grabs you by the arm and then starts taking you through the produce section and down the meat aisle, going down the pasta aisles and the international food section. And you go to the frozen food section. And then they take you out to your car where they're going to let you go. But while they're taking you out to your car, they've still got you by the arm. And then they get you in your car and then they wave goodbye. So the reason I'm giving you this bizarre scenario is that the angling event for muskies is a completely foreign, unnatural experience. They, go about their business, all day long, chasing down perch and suckers and slithering through weed beds and going up over reefs and things like that. To get hooked and then pulled into the boat and then pulled out of the water into an environment where they can't get oxygen and then put back, and that is totally bizarre to them. And so what I suggest to people is, if you want to try and improve your handling of the fish, it's just to handle them as little as possible. So what I advocate these days, and what I've been doing the last couple of years for sure, is basically just get the fish back in the water and just let go of the fish. If you put the fish in the water, get a release shot if you want. I always like getting release shots. But beyond that, after your buddy's taking a picture of you releasing the fish, just let go. You don't need to slosh the fish back and forth or side to side. As long as the fish is able to sit upright in the water, just take your hands away and let the fish go. In the end of that scenario there, it's that stranger taking you by the arm and escorting you to your car, to the safe place. You don't want to be in contact with that stranger anymore. You'd feel a lot more comfortable if that stranger just let go of you and you were able to get to safety on your own. And so that's kind of the same thing with these muskies. They don't want to be touched anymore. It's bizarre for them to be. They're an apex predator. They're not used to things touching them. And so if you want to try and at least improve to some degree your handling of them, it's just to let them go once they get back. Once you put them back into the water. So again, minimizing air exposure, getting them in as fast as possible. Something that I'm probably going to do a bit more this year is reach for the Knipex a lot faster than I normally would. So typically my default is just to reach for the long nose pliers and start trying to, get the hooks out of the fish. And most times the hooks come out pretty easily. You clamp down on the hook, the fish thrashes a bit and it dislodges the hook. But there's a number of times where I've, really had to work and probably should have put the pliers down a lot faster and picked up the Knipex. As Brent said, hooks are cheap. And so, I think this year my default may be just to go with the pliers. I'll just get a stash of hooks and a good split ring plier and grab the Knipex, cut away, grab the long nose pliers and pop out the little remnant of the hook there. And be done with it. And that's another way to just speed up the process and get everything done with and get that fish back in the water as quickly as possible. So that's all I've got for everybody. I think we should open this up to some questions for the next, about 10 minutes or so. I already saw some questions in the comments there.
Okay, do you mind if I pop in there before
pop
we get
in,
to
Mike?
questions?
Yeah, for sure.
So just another thing for release tactics, guys. There. So sometimes you're in situations where it's actually, say, you're fishing from rocks, or you're in a boat and the fish is doing its thing. And sometimes the best thing to do is, say, you're holding your fish, you're taking a picture, and that fish is thrashing around. As a mentor of mine, Bill Craig, once said, releases aren't always pretty. Sometimes you just have to let that fish fly off the side of the boat and back into the water. If you're holding it and it's doing this, sometimes the best thing to do is off the side of the boat. See you later. It may not be a pretty release, but he's back in the water. For you guys that are fishing from shore, from the rocks, use your net as a release tool. You got a long handle on that. Leave the fish in the net once you get the hooks out, and instead of climbing down on a dangerous spot on those icy rocks, put that fish in the net and hold it there until he's ready to go. And you can just pull that net out from underneath him and he'll swim away. Instead of bashing it off the rocks and, you're holding it and one arm in the water, balancing act off the rocks, use your net. It's a tool you have with a long handle, and it's meant to hold a fish as a cradle. So it's just other things you have that you can use as a tool to help that fish survive, right? Along with, your jaw spreaders, your hook cutters, and your long pliers and all that wonderful stuff, right? So releases aren't always pretty. You don't always get those beautiful release shots. Sometimes it's just about getting that fish in the water, swimming away safely. So, and when you cut your hooks, Sean was talking about getting that little remnant out. Sometimes it's in there good, and it's better to just leave it. If it's buried in there and you need to get a scalpel to get that thing out, no, just leave it, and it'll eventually work its way out like a sliver in a human, or a piercing kind of deal, right? It'll eventually come out. So don't worry about getting in there and making a 2-inch gash and trying to get that hook out. Just cut it and leave it be if you have to.
Yeah, as you guys just said about cutting the hooks there, quite often, the odd time you do have to leave it in, and that's a scenario I use quite often, Mike, is like a sliver. But usually once you release that pressure and you cut those hooks, usually they pop right out for you. They fall right out. So
cool. I'm
we
a,
get a question I think probably it's going to be for you to answer there, Sean, about the fizzing.
yeah, sure. So definitely don't fizz a muskie. I wouldn't recommend fizzing any fish. You know, I know there's people out there that believe that fizzing smallmouth bass, you know, is really effective and whatever. I can't, in good conscience, as a biologist, advocate that people go around stabbing fish with needles if they're not, you know, super familiar with their anatomy. But for muskies, it's definitely not needed because muskies are very different from a smallmouth bass or a walleye because they don't have the same kind of air bladder. So yesterday, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Bill Barber actually in the you know, your best day on the water. I think it was the last presentation. And Bill yesterday was talking about getting a really big fish, and it was like 56 inches long or something, and they measured the girth and it was like 29 inches. And Bill said that he's like, no, there's no way. And they just pressed down a bit on the fish, and he said you could see the fish just kind of deflate. And so their air bladders, actually, muskies' air bladders are actually connected to their throats through a tiny little duct called the pneumatic duct. And what it does is it enables them to basically go to the surface and gulp air, or they can expel air from their air bladder and force it through the pneumatic duct, and it comes up out the throat, through the throat, and then out the mouth. And so theoretically, you could burp a muskie by you know, running your hand along the underside of the fish. I think there are some people, it's not very, I don't think it's used very much, but there are some people that use deep water release devices, which is basically just like a weighted clip that you put on the jaw of the fish and you send it down to depth. And then there's all you have to do is basically just lift up on the line and it pulls that clip out. But it gets that fish away from the surface and back down to the depth around at which it came from. And that apparently seems to work pretty well. People use it on the West Coast a lot for really, really deep water fish species like rockfish.
I use it on Lake Ontario.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I do it when I'm down rigging. Sometimes if I catch rainbows, because they come, they're bastards. Sorry, my language. They come up. Sorry, they float on the top sometimes, and they just go belly up if you just release them normally. So I use a release device on a downrigger, and I drop them sometimes down, and off they go. So
yeah.
So Mike's asking about hookouts. Yeah, hookouts are you know, they can be a very effective tool, especially for fish that are hooked a little deeper down. Not say down the throat area, but deeper in the mouth, where you know they're a little bit longer. You can get in that hook, give it a quick little pop, and they can work real good as well.
Cool. We have other questions here? Mike, would barbless hooks be better? Potentially, yeah. So there's information in the literature, not with muskies, that indicates barbless hooks do less damage, physical injury to the fish. And so, you know, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to use barbless hooks. The other thing that it could do is it could help speed up the whole unhooking process. So again, if you want to try and minimize time, you can do that by using barbless hooks. Yeah, I don't. Brent, do you use barbless hooks? Mike?
I don't use barbless hooks, and it's interesting. This question is really quite interesting because I've also heard years ago people talking about using barbless hooks that they'll actually penetrate a lot deeper, which could be dangerous on a fish. I guess depending where it's hooked, even. So, yeah, I don't. For me, it'd be kind of 50-50 whether you should or not. But it's definitely a lot easier to unhook a fish with barbless hook, that's for sure. And I don't think you're going to lose fish because of hooks or barbless. You keep pressure on that fish. I don't think it's an issue about losing them.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Adds a better challenge to the fight, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, they're hard enough to catch as it is. But fly fishermen, you know, there's a lot of jurisdictions where you have to use barbless hook flies, and you know, fly fishermen tell you that they still catch fish. It's just a matter of you got to be good. Our musky rods, you know, the one thing about like our musky rods and the super braid, they're pretty unforgiving. So I don't know if there'd be more of a chance of the fish coming dislodged off the hook because if they shake their head or something, throw some slack into the line, the rod and the line doesn't necessarily absorb that. I don't know. But that's an interesting point, and I do get that question sometimes about barbless hooks. Steve has a question here. Snip off the hooks. What type of hook is best for the fish? Example, stainless. There's a question. I think this gets to like, will hooks rust out of the fish? They don't seem to really do. I think it's a bit of a misconception that hooks will rust out of the fish, and especially in freshwater where there's less solutes and less salt in the water, far less certainly than in the marine environment. I mean, I've dived with sharks before, and I've seen hooks in the corners of their mouth that are like firmly in the corner of their mouth, circle hooks, and it doesn't look like they're going anywhere for any period of time. And that's in salt water, and it's probably those are probably stainless hooks. So I think just about any hook would be fine for the fish.
Well, just going back to the barbless there. A lot of bass lines that throw crankbaits, they'll use monofilament lines that's got a little bit of stretch, or a little bit lighter tip on the rod, right? So it's got a little bit more bend in it. It's a little more forgiving, so that you keep that pressure on the fish. I'm not suggesting a musky fisherman go with a lighter rod by any means, but that's just a scenario where you're throwing crankbaits with treble hooks. A bass guy is going to use a rod that's more forgiving boat side.
Yeah. Got another question here. Would a bigger hook be a better hook to use when fishing muskie or smaller hooks? What size hooks do you guys use?
I just, depending on the size of the bait, really, anywhere from a 5 to a 7 overall. If it's like a 14-inch Franklin's hook, it's going to be a 7-inch, or pardon me, a 7-aught hook. If it's a 9-inch, it's probably a 5-aught hook. So I would say probably between 4 and 7, depending on the bait. It's got to match up to your bait, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike.
So I agree with the hook's got to match to the bait. A wise man once told me, Johnny Libera said, man size your hooks. So I run a lot of 9s and 8s. That's just me personally. I also run a lot of bigger baits. I know people that run 5s religiously or 6s. For me, I find releasing is a lot easier with a bigger hook. You have more meat on that hook to kind of get a hold of it, to cut it. When it's in the mouth, if it's right deep to that triple treble at the bottom, you got more access to cut the hook. That's just me personally. I'm a big fan of 8s and 9s. I usually always upsize my hooks, but as I said, it's a personal preference on what bait you're using. It has to make the bait run properly as well. You can't put a 9 on a little grandma and expect it to do its thing, right? It's going to weigh it right down. So it all depends on the bait. But as I said, I'm a big fan of 8s and 9s.
Yeah, Mike Brace is a good point there about the bigger hooks having a bigger bend right down at the bottom of the hook, and so that actually might facilitate you being able to get your pliers onto the hook and pop it out easier. Whereas if you're using something like a 3-aught, which a lot of like smaller twitch baits and small rubber baits might come with, if it's a big fish and that hook is pretty well buried down into the fish's flesh, you might only have a tiny little bit of the hook that you can really grip onto with your pliers, and so it could be kind of a challenge, especially if the fish is moving around, to get your pliers in there. So that's a good point, Mike.
We've had to cut the hook hangers before on baits, $100 bait, $200 bait, because it had a smaller hook on it and we couldn't cut where it was. It was just so deep in there. So you do run potential of hurting the fish more and, wrecking a bait that costs you a lot of money. So to me, it's just, I like my bigger hooks. It's just something I've adapted to over the years and I've come accustomed to. So
it hasn't affected your hookup ratio either, obviously. So
no. The only time I use smaller hooks, and that's for salmon. I've been taught that the smaller the hook, the better the hookup. It kind of gets into the side of the mouth a little bit better than using a bigger treble or whatever. But that's a different species. We're kind of different presentation. But for muskies, I've always believed in bigger hooks. So
Duncan has an interesting question here. He's talking about tonic immobility. some of you may not have any idea what that is, but you've probably seen it used on Shark Week when they flip sharks over, giant tiger sharks, 12 feet long or more. And they flip the tiger sharks over and they basically just sit there. And then they can take like an ultrasound and do whatever they want to on the fish. And so that's what Duncan is referring to here, whether we can flip muskies over on their backs and whether they can basically just be kind of immobilized. And I mean, this hasn't been formally tested, but I will say that during Project Noble Beast, when we were needing to do blood sampling, you have to flip the fish over because there's a vein and a vessel that runs right along the backbone, and the needle, the syringe, has to go right down, kind of at the base of the anal fin, where that vasculature system is. So to do that, we flip the fish over, but often they would just chill out. They would just sit there. At first I was really paranoid that we were going to have to strap the fish down because they'd be flopping all over the place. But by the end of the study, I could flip it over and have the other person prepping gear on the front of the boat without even holding the fish. And they would just sit there. They were in a cradle. So they were in like a V-shaped trough within the boat, not really a cradle, but a trough within the boat. But that did seem to work pretty well. I think if you were to flip them over in the net, that would be probably a pretty good way of trying to control them. They did seem to respond positively to doing that.
One of the comments here, guys, that's quite interesting is somebody mentioned that if you're fishing solo and you get a hook in your hand, it's a little easier to get it out if you're fishing barbless.
Yeah, I saw that. yeah. We had a few people in Project Noble Beast that got hooked, that cut our days kind of short. Yeah. It was. That's a very good point for sure.
Well, as fishermen, we all know it's eventually going to happen to the best of us. It really is. So it's good to learn how to do it, to at least watch the video or get your little notes there on how to take a hook out of your own skin. As a guide, I deal with a lot of hooks in the face, so I have safety equipment. I wear my sunglasses whenever I'm at the back of the boat. I've seen enough hooks come flying across the boat and inches away from my face. So, you got to keep that in mind, right? We're moving a hook out of people, not just fish.
Yeah, for sure.
Another little question here. Sean was asking about if a tiger muskies or a hybrid is it is a muskie and a pike that have spawned together. Late spawning pike and an early spawning muskie. Could be male, female, doesn't matter. Either or. So.
Yeah, they do spawn with pike for sure in systems where the two species coexist. There is an overlap. Generally speaking, pike breed a lot earlier, but there is overlap.
So a tiger muskie, they don't breed, correct? Let everybody know that is a known fact.
They can.
Okay.
They can.
I'm curious.
It's rare. It's rare, but they can. Yeah.
What's this rare situation like? Is it the stars have to align, or is it when they mate?
There's a number of reproductive barriers. I don't think we have time to go into it. There's a number of reproductive barriers that would prevent hybrids from breeding with each other, but in very rare occasions they can actually successfully produce offspring from hybrids, but it's pretty rare. For the most part, hybrids don't successfully spawn with each other.
We'll have to talk about that more in depth one day. That's something I'm very interested in. So,
nice.
All right. Well, guys, I know we're getting close on time here. I just want to say it's been a real pleasure and an honor working with you guys on this presentation.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much for coming. Very knowledgeable guys. You both are. You have a lot of information and both successful fishermen. And I'm very happy that we got to do this together. I really am.
Cool. Yeah. And thanks to the audience too for asking some good questions. And I think there's some that we didn't get a chance to address, and I'll pop in on Facebook and answer them.
Yeah. And guys, we have to put a big thank you out there to all the Odyssey team there. Ryan Pickering, Peter Levick, Ryan Fagundo, Pierre. I'm missing people here. I'm so sorry. But you guys did an amazing job. Absolutely fantastic. Same with our bidding team, our auction team. You guys are phenomenal. So great job, guys.
Awesome. Agree with all that.
Well, hello. How are things progressing over on Muskie's Canada Official?
We're great.
Pretty
Awesome. I'm glad to see you guys. I'm glad that I get to share the screen with you guys for a minute. I'll give you an update. Over on the live auction site, Muskie's Canada Mississauga, we are auctioning off King Bowser. I am selling him. He is the bachelor of the hour, and he is fetching a pretty penny. You know, I didn't even have to use your boudoir shot of you lying on that bear rug yet. And
Oh, you can put it up anyway. I don't mind.
we're already at $500, and so that's super exciting. Thanks for joining us, guys. How was your session?
It was good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing. My producer's going to start kicking you guys right on out of here, just getting you right off the screen. Thank you, guys. Out you go, Bowser. There we go.